Hello and welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, we are interviewing the head of customer analytics at Bayer. So Sangeeta has quite an experience not only with analytics but also software engineering as well. And she has a great conversation hosted by Hunter, but we also get one of my Greensboro College students, Olivia, and Kadisha Bryan, who is a current apprentice through the Greensboro College apprenticeship program. One quick announcement before we start the episode. The Analytics Career Services program is now taking applications. So if you want a chance to work directly with me and my team and get real data sets to build out a solid portfolio, check the link in the description and you can learn more all about that program. With all that being said, I hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the How to Get an Analytics Job podcast. And today we have a phenomenal guest in Sangeeta. Sangeeta, welcome to the podcast. And also joining us is Kadisha and Olivia, two of our newest apprentices in the Silvertone Analytics program. It's a pleasure to have you all here.
Hi, everyone.
So Sangeeta, we'll start with you. I know you've had quite a bit of analytics experience. Do you want to walk us through that?
Sure. So thanks for inviting me to this podcast. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my background. I come with a lot of software engineering background. That's what I studied as well. I have a master's in computer science. And then over the years, I have taken a lot of different roles in different kind of organizations, whether it's Fortune 500, not-for-profit, all sizes of companies, I would say. Coming from a software engineering background kind of helped. So I was a .NET coder myself. Then I moved more into data and data analytics kind of roles. Before joining Bayer, I've been with Bayer only for 2.5 months now. So it's relatively new. So I head up their customer analytics. So I lead that part of the business in consumer health specifically. So that is what I do currently. Before joining Bayer, I have done a lot of like ETL work, machine learning work, all kinds of anything data, visualization, everything. And most recently, I finished writing my first data book, which is supposed to be launched December of this year. Actually, I'm working with the publisher to have all the editing, everything done. So I'm pretty excited about my first book because that's a milestone I had for myself. So
You have the name finalized yet for that book?
Yeah, it's going to be called as Thriving in the Data World. So that is the name of the book. And my idea for that book was more like, it's not a very technical book, but how to survive, as the name suggests. Like for somebody who's not coming from a technical background, it's very tough. It could be very confusing, all these buzzwords and everything. So the book aims for a business analyst, product owner, those kind of people, how they can really navigate and get value out of data and how they could appreciate it, basically.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense because we've seen a lot of struggles trying to communicate some of those more technical terms over to actual real applied business skills. Interesting enough, you started in code, but you moved into analytics. Was there a reason why you were more drawn to analytics?
I am more of like a problem solver. So for me, it kind of shaped into, so even in my years of coding, I have done a lot of web coding, like web programming. And I took on a role of like a product owner after like a software engineer kind of a role, where it kind of helped me to see the overall product, like the portfolio itself. So data is definitely of my interest, even when I was doing software engineering work, and that is like several years ago. So obviously we were like there was no concept of cloud that time. So obviously everything was on-prem and SQL Server was obviously there. And also the data volume we are talking was much, much less. than we would anticipate right now. So that kind of interested me, being a problem solver, like, something of the unknown. That is what I would advise anybody who wants to enter data. It's not like everything will be known and laid out for you perfectly. If you have that curiosity, that's the right profession. And because sometimes people enter the data thing and then they're like, oh, this is not something right for me. That is because you maybe are a person who is more happy in a path where it is already clearly laid out for you.
And so, talking about things not necessarily being laid out perfectly, when you were first starting out, did you struggle with maybe finding a sense of direction and what you wanted to go with in the data field?
I would not say I struggled a lot, because one of the reasons is I already had a bit of like IT experience before I moved to data. So, and also I've studied SQL Server even in my master's program. So I had like quite a bit of exposure to databases regardless. And also I had some good mentors during my time who have really helped me to shape, like, okay, this is what you should focus on and all those things. So that was really part of helpful. And some industry conferences I have attended during my time span kind of helped me also to really see the different things, not just what your organization is doing, but also across the board, right? It's always better, like, I mean, we're not like working in a silo. Everybody in the industry is doing something. There should be something good about it. So that kind of helped me.
Well, so you had a mentor. Did you meet that person in college or
No, at work.
at work? What were you doing at that time?
That time I was working as a product owner, and then I went into more like a data heavy role. So I started off like building like SSIS packages and so on and so forth, like how a typical data analyst, data engineer / whatever the titles are, every company uses is interchangeably sometimes. So that is how I started, and then moving more into leading data teams.
Okay. And so, are there any what have you noticed have been some major differences between maybe when you were doing that more technical work and now as you're working as a team lead at Bayer?
Uh, Definitely, one thing I would say which has changed is data volume, that anybody will agree, and rapid pace of like tools offering. Like the tool is becoming more and more smart. That is what I would say. Like you don't have to sit and write lines and lines of code, which was not there even 7 years ago. It was not like that. So every time there is a new product release, like of any technology, whether it's Tableau, it doesn't matter which tool we're talking, it is definitely making it very, very easy for people, or less code too. That is an area many people are going as well. Like Ask Data in Tableau is a good example, where people are more going in that direction. Which was not available when I was coding. We had to really code a lot, and obviously it was not very heavy Python as well that time.
Pretty
So
math intensive, I would
very
imagine
intense.
also,
So we
yeah.
have to really write everything ourselves, which is something I see a big difference in trend. And open source has picked up a lot too. So that time it was more like proprietary. So everybody was building their own. So that cross collaboration was kind of missing. Then now open source community has definitely picked up a lot in pretty much most of the tool set we are talking about.
And as far as keeping up with new technology is concerned, you think it's getting easier, not harder, to get into the data analytics space?
That's not what I meant, actually. I meant the tools are becoming easier. Actually, the competition is very heavy. Anybody who is applying for a data job will agree to me that, because if I mean, even for me, at Bayer, as I mentioned, I'm very new, but in the previous jobs, I've been interviewing a lot of people for data engineer, data analyst, machine learning kind of roles, data scientist, and all these roles I've been interviewing for quite some time. The pool of applications we get is enormous, and it's not really possible for somebody to really like to read every single resume, right? It's simply not humanly possible. So obviously, I wouldn't say getting a job or entry-level job in the data field is very easy right now. Rather, there is a lot more competition because there is a lot of buzz going on. Everybody wants to get a data scientist role, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. And people just would like that title than a data analyst because they feel my salary will be better just because I have the title, which sometimes may be true, but not always. But because sometimes even companies are figuring out, and it is all relative. But yeah, getting a job, I would say, has become much more challenging than becoming
Well,
easy.
so you mentioned it's getting more competitive. What are some ways you think that new entry level analysts can stay in the race? Is that through learning better tools, or is that from being more, personal branding kind of thing, more of a networking kind of thing?
I'm going to pick personal branding and networking more than any training, because training, I mean, again, in the last 3 to 4 years, if you have Udemy courses everywhere, you can literally, not just those kind of courses, even colleges have their own online platform. You can literally go and learn any tool in 3 6 months. I mean, whatever your journey looks like, whatever tools you pick. I wouldn't, when I interview anybody, I really don't focus so much on the tools they know, because if you have the right frame of mind and you are a good learner and you have that creative thinking, I can teach you any tool within like a couple of weeks, at the most a couple of months. But if you don't have that critical thinking and you have these three tools, and nowadays, like big companies are, I mean, they get acquired by somebody, there is mergers, this team is using this tool, my parent company is going to use different tools. So if I hire based on the tools they know, it's going to be a constant struggle for me to fit them in. So I wouldn't say that tools matter so much, but obviously everybody should know the basics, like some backend tool, something as a front end, and work on presentation skills, because as a data person, you will always be asked, because it doesn't matter what report you build, people will always want you to present in front on a summary level so that everybody can understand. So work on some kind of a presentation tool also, which goes a long way. But online courses are good from a learning perspective. But if your expectation is to get a job, the things you should do is as I mentioned, like we get so many resumes for any opening, especially if it is in like 3 to 5 years kind of experience, we definitely get, because there are a lot of recent college graduates. There are a lot of people who have like a year or so, they did like some kind of a data rudimentary kind of a role. Now they think they have done enough. I want to move more into a heavy focused data engineer, data analyst, data scientist kind of role. So we get a tons of application. So how you would stand out is, like, first of all, your resume should kind of highlight something immediately. Like it could be anything, like a project you did which relates to the current business you're applying, which most of the times in like less than 5 years kind of resumes, what I have noticed is they focus a lot about like speaking about some competitions they have won, or like wherever, like, you know, or some boot camp they attended, some fun project where they were the second prize winner, and so on, which I'm not discouraging. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's definitely good because they learn. But at the end of the day, when we interview somebody and bring them onboarded into a company, the thing we are looking for is solving a particular business problem. It's not really a competition anymore. It's a collaborative effort, right? So
yeah, that medal isn't really resume worthy, is what you're saying.
correct, because I want that person to collaborate with everybody and bring the best solution rather than competing against teams. I mean, a sportive competition is not bad, but it's not a race. I mean, at the end of the day, maybe this project you lead, but somebody else may have a better idea just because they had a different fresh pair of eyes. That happens to a coder. If anybody has coded, they all will agree, like, I've been like trying to debug my own code for like an hour, but I cannot find the problem. What the problem is, somebody just walks in within a minute, they'll say, because it's just they are looking from a very different angle and they'll catch that issue immediately. So that collaboration is very important. So in the resume, that's what I would look at. And a lot of certifications we see, which is very common, I wouldn't say that it's bad, like, because sometimes it's good, like, because you're, for the hiring manager, you're saying like, oh, I'm certified, I'm passionate, I'm a constant learner. That stands out. But that alone, I mean, I wouldn't reject a candidate just because I thought, oh, they don't have a Tableau certification. They don't have that. Would not be a criteria. If they were good overall, having a certification or not is kind of optional. But some people do it a different route. Even I have a couple of certifications myself. The reason for me to have those certifications is not for, oh, to get a job or anything. Rather, sometimes to learn something, you want to have that focus. This is the plan. I learned this much. Let me test my knowledge. So I do my certifications only for that, like gaining knowledge, get better at it. But so if even entry level, 5 years experience, 3 years, 2 years, whatever it is, I would say they should definitely focus on branding. And also, so there is a lot of meetups too in the neighborhood. So that's not a bad idea for somebody to just join some meetups in local areas to know more about what people are doing. And also sometimes, in because data is so vast, it is better to kind of pick like what you like. What I mean by that is,
Like a personal project.
but like a domain, like, do you like finance, do you like healthcare? I mean, most of my career, I have worked in other industries too, but most of my data journey or data experience is healthcare related. I have more healthcare, whatever, anything healthcare, actually, insurance, I mean, dental insurance, and pharma and specialty pharma. So pretty much, and Bayer, I sit in consumer health, which is also kind of on the healthcare side. So I have more on healthcare because that's something I'm passionate about. That doesn't mean I don't have any other experience. I have worked in other industries, but I'm, especially for somebody who is very right out of school, it's very tough for someone to say, okay, let me just go around and apply to every job. It doesn't matter wherever I land, it's fine. Because then it's very tough for you to focus your energy and to brand you a certain way for a hiring manager to see it. So it's better to pick some domain, at least one or two, even if you're not that selective, you're not sure. Better to pick one or two domains, or at least pick these one or two domains doesn't interest me that much. I'm going to eliminate them. I'm not going to even bother applying for such jobs.
So, Sangeeta, I'd imagine as a team lead, you oftentimes work very closely with those hiring managers as to picking out team members. Would you say that
Yes.
that's accurate?
Mhm.
So in your most recent hires, have there been any specific qualities that you've noticed in team members that have been above all else? That's like, okay, this is a major, this, I need this in all of my candidates.
Um, One thing I definitely need in everybody is people who are ready to adapt, because sometimes it has happened in the past, like where people come with a very clear definition. Okay, this is my role, this is what I'm going to do. They're not very flexible. They don't want to change that. And that I find it quite tough to work with, because sometimes when we hire and after 6 months the company changes direction, you should be very adaptive. And especially in the technology space where tools change, everything changes, the way we store data changes, everything constantly evolves. So that is an expectation. I definitely, that's one personality trait I definitely go for. Like when I meet anybody, they should be adaptive, they should be flexible to accept that things are not the way we wanted it, but we have to work around it.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I know that Olivia, Kadisha, you guys are going to be working with me when you guys get to the technical aspect of the apprenticeship program. And so for all those listening, what if you're unfamiliar, what we do is we match up our apprentices with a real company located in, well, right now it's located in Greensboro, but they need data analytics work done, and we hook them up with the data, and we essentially, so I don't know if you got around to reading it yet in Discord yet, Kadisha, but we just posted the new data for South Atlantic Packaging Company, and we are trying to create Hey, I'm getting on a tangent here. I'm realizing as I'm talking myself into this tangent, but we're working on an overtime cost dashboard. And so, Sangeeta, a question for you: if you had a candidate come to you and they were a student in the analytics space, but they had already worked on real data, would you see that as more valuable, or would you just say it's on par with working with something like sample data from like Kaggle or something?
No, definitely not. If somebody has done like some kind of internship or something with real data, that we will definitely consider as a plus, because I mean, any data set which is like a sample data is like perfect data, and real world data will never be perfect. Doesn't matter which company you work for, real data has its own challenges. So I would definitely prefer somebody who has done like that kind of a tie-up with a company, so that they have done, or even internships. Some people have internships, which is totally fine. That would be of value.
Well, so Kanisha and Olivia, I'm kind of going to open the door to both of you guys here if you wanted to ask Sangeeta some questions about what it's like to break into the analytics space and to go through a program, or maybe to go through a program like that or get hired at a company like Bayer.
I had a question. So I'm a senior, and I was just wondering if you had like any advice for right now, or like graduates. I will graduate in May. If you have any advice for me and how to get more noticed or anything like that.
Couple of things I would say is like definitely work on your resume, which stands out. That's branding part is very, very important. And other thing I would say is if you're located in a specific place and you don't want to move, and that is the area of focus, start looking like some kind of entry level jobs. It's always better to network. And pretty much most people are on LinkedIn to reach out, start doing that. And other way to get noticed, I would say, is I mean, some people feel like posting a lot on LinkedIn would be helpful, posting regularly. I don't have a strong feeling about it, just because I know a lot of hiring managers who go to LinkedIn once in every 3 months or 6 months, and they are, because they're so busy, they don't. So I'm going to refrain from giving that advice to anybody. I mean, posting is fine. That's because that's how you learn from other people's posts and everything. If that is something you like, definitely go for it. But that's not something so important. I would say networking, going like to the company website, trying to understand. I would even say, like, because you're just going to be graduating, just pick like whatever kind of a role you look, data analyst, data engineer, whatever your focus is, visualization person, whatever. Go and run a search and pick like 10, 15, whatever number in the area of your choice, wherever you're living. So just pick like 15, 20, whatever number of job descriptions, try to copy paste it and try to see normally what is like the pattern. You'll definitely find a pattern. That's why I said, like, at least don't keep it to 100. It just overwhelms you. But just keep it to a sample of like your data person, so you can do it, right? So, and then try to see like what are the patterns. And if you are very clear that, oh, healthcare is what I want to work for, try to locate companies which are in that interest domain, basically, and try to look at their jobs, like how they're asking, because then you can not only put it on your resume that you have it, you can also shape yourself in a way that, okay, these are the key things they are looking for. I should focus. So network, and what I suggested from like looking at the job descriptions and figuring out, that would definitely be helpful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Kanisha, you had a question too?
Yeah, I'd like to know, for like interviewing, since you've interviewed a lot of candidates, what would you say are like common pitfalls that you've seen in interviews?
Common pitfalls. People talk a lot sometimes. I mean, I got this advice long ago when I started my job. Somebody gave this advice to me. And I till date, I feel that is the best advice. They said, people are so happy to share so much so fast. Don't do that. There is a reason. You don't want like these one word, one sentence kind of answers, but at the same time, you don't want to go overboard, sharing way too much too fast. And that happens because you kind of want them to tell, okay, you're looking for what? What are the kind of projects you have? Is it like a data migration happening in the background? So you will kind of understand a little bit more about what is exactly, because job description many times deceives people, because in the job description they may say something, and when you start talking to 2-3 people who are going to be a decision maker in your hiring, they may have a slightly different version because HR might have asked them to write description a certain way. Whatever the reason could be, they might have given it to somebody to write it. It's possible. Or sometimes from the time the job description went online, the requirement changed a bit. Regardless, when in your conversation, make sure to understand it a bit further before sharing way too much. And try to stay a little away from buzzwords is the second thing I would like to say, because everybody who comes like for a data scientist, data engineer jobs, they will have all the buzzwords they can speak. So that kind of like, it's a red flag, because it's like, oh, that's where it's in the news everywhere. Be yourself. If that's something you like whatever you do, that will really help. Like you can say, like if you want to use the buzzwords, there's nothing wrong. You can just say, oh, there was an article I read and this caught my attention and it was interesting. In that way you can say, rather than saying I'm an expert in all these buzzwords. That doesn't make much sense, right? So
Yeah, less about the technical jargon, more about the results, more about
yeah.
what actually happened.
And
Also,
one quick thing I wanted to add is like quantify, always quantify, like, which is very, very important, because saying, oh, I built a report, it's good, but maybe, even though you might not, I get it, because it's not like, people who are just out of school or 1 year of experience, I don't expect them to be working on a $2 million project. That's totally understandable. They would not be at that level yet. But even if it is small, quantify whether it was a revenue savings, 15 people liked it, whatever that number is, that quantification, have it in the resume, but that doesn't mean they read it and they would have caught their attention there. It's always better to quantify and speak it out when you meet.
you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say quantify, 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 quantify. If you saved a company $35 million by finding a miscalculated revenue column, they need to hear about that. Hiring managers need to hear about that. So talking about sharing your work, when you're in the hiring process, how important is seeing the projects that your team members or the team members have worked on in the past? Like, for example, like if you were browsing LinkedIn for potential team members and you saw like somebody had in their feature section, they had like their Tableau public portfolio, for example. Is that something that you feel like is absolutely necessary? You think that's probably every Tableau scientist should have that?
It sometimes is a little bit based on the personality of the hiring manager too. So there is no right or wrong or yes or no kind of answer. Having that is not bad, but if the criteria is like, should I have like 20 different dashboards published there so that everybody can scan through and look through it? Definitely not, because most of the times nobody will, unless they become very, very interested in that candidate, most of the time nobody is checking out that much of detail. Having one or two good, regardless of how many projects you have done, you will always have those one or two which you are very proud of. So make that stand out, because if there are 15 of them, yeah, there are, but nobody will check it. So
it's hard to get in touch with hiring managers sometimes, and getting your work in front of hiring managers sometimes. Sorry, rather, I meant to say, what's a good way to build a relationship with a hiring manager in advance of being hired? Because I know sometimes bridging that gap between, oh, I'm just a candidate, and oh, I'm somebody you can count on, can be tricky.
That is true. But one thing I'm going to take like a little step back is sometimes sharing work. Like, let's say you worked on a lot of, like, for your company, you built a lot of dashboards. You are not even allowed to share that publicly, right? So that's another thing that kind of stands out. The more you put those are like your pet projects basically rather than real work. Because even for my work, I mean, I've built a lot of dashboards in my career. I'm not going to have a portfolio of that because it's proprietary. I cannot share. I'm not supposed to. So all those things. That's
Yeah.
one thing. Getting in touch with a hiring manager is not as easy, because that's why, I mean, sometimes there are recruiters who have a bit, and some companies only hire with the help of recruiters. That's also there. They will either have their own internal recruiting team talk to the candidate first, and the hiring manager will not be reachable no matter what. In those scenarios, you have to live with it, because those are the company rules sometimes, right? They're not supposed to do
Yeah, I know. I know.
anything.
Oftentimes, a lot of bigger companies have procedures like that. Yeah.
Yeah, especially bigger companies. In a small company, so the answer to your question would be, the bigger the company is, those rules will be there. And some companies, bigger companies, only work with certain agencies, certain recruiting companies, or a couple of them, whatever. I mean, every company is a bit different, but you cannot get access to the hiring manager that easily. Even if you send them a message on LinkedIn, they may not be reading, they may not be willing to reply, whatever. So that's not possible. So in that case, you have to work around it. That's why the branding part comes, where your resume catches the attention and it is good enough that they want to speak to you. That's the only way to go.
Is if you don't mind me butting in real quick? You got hired at Bear. It looks like 4 months ago. Is that right?
3 months,
3 or 4
yeah,
months.
so 2.5, 3 months, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you get noticed by Bear, or did you have to go out and kind of wedge your way in there and say, "Hey, I'm here"?
Not really, because a lot of people reach out. The more and more experience you have, a lot of people reach out on LinkedIn too. So keep your LinkedIn updated, because a lot of recruiters or recruiting agencies or even hiring managers are looking at LinkedIn. Somebody in that company is looking in LinkedIn and they reach out to you, and that happens. So that's why it's very important that your LinkedIn is updated with the most latest information. So that is one way. But even that goes to the same branding concept, whether it's a resume, whether it's your LinkedIn, you're branding yourself a certain way that people want to talk to you. But you may not have luck in reaching out to these big companies, hiring managers directly. But the case may be a little different if it is more of a smaller company, where you may get access to a hiring manager. And that's why I suggested, like, sometimes some people are more active outside the community part of it. They will be a part of a meetup group. They may be doing those things. You may meet them in a conference. So those kind of maybe a slightly easier to network, because you know that person already in some way. So that may work.
Yeah. Makes sense. Olivia, Kadisha, do you have any other questions, by the way? Just want to loop you guys in.
Yeah, I did. Were there any lessons that you learned like early in your career that would be beneficial to know?
One lesson I would say I learned is definitely, like, when you're very new in your job, like in the career itself, you're kind of very focused in your area, right? Like whatever you're assigned, you're trying to complete, because there's a lot to learn.
Right.
So I would say try to network even within your company, because there are other teams, and many times it's like, oh, this is my job description, I'm doing that, it's well and great. That is not a very good idea. So the little bit you can spend time, like networking within the company, will be very helpful. You have the curiosity to find what other teams are doing in your capacity. I mean, you cannot just go, and if it's a large company, you're not going to learn what every team is doing, but at least around in your surrounding, keep your ears and eyes open would be an advice or lessons learned, I would say. Like, don't just because everybody does that. Like when they're very, very new in their job, they're so focused in giving the best,
Mhm.
which is understandable because they're very new. They're nervous also sometimes, but still keep that little bit of a buffer time to do those things.
Okay.
I know John David oftentimes says, "Don't be a specialist." I mean, it means have a toolbox, have a wide variety of tools that you're at least familiar with, so that way you can adapt. Like you were talking about, Sangeeta, at adaptation, having the ability to adapt to a different job. Sometimes you can fall into that trap of, oh, I've been working with Power BI and Excel my whole life. I'm going to visualize everything in Power BI and Excel until the day I die. And it's like, that's just not how, that just won't work in the analytics space. Kadisha, did you have any questions either?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that point you just made, Hunter, because I see posts that say you should specialize, and then you just say like, oh, you should not specialize, you should be a generalist. Like, and I see people say, well, eventually you're going to specialize. So I like to know like what's like the best or like opinionated response to that. Like for folks, or are we gonna all eventually specialize? Is it good to just be a generalist? What's like the best route to take?
I will answer it slightly different. It is one thing I feel is like when you're very new, it's very tough to say that this is the one thing I am going to be so good at, right? Because I don't even know what other things exist. So, in that way, I would say that anybody who is right out of school or 1 or 2 years of experience, it's better to uh, try like a consulting kind of a company, which is definitely a good idea, I would say, because consulting gives you that exposure where you're still part of like some kind of a organization rather than committing to a specific job. So that kind of will give you an exposure like, okay, in consulting, I'm doing a little bit of this, little bit of that with different companies too, because they will have different clients. So you can kind of within a 1 or 2 years of doing that, you can figure out what is the best you should do specialization in. Because what happens sometimes is you may think you're great in visualization. You may be a very good data engineer, actually. You're not a visualization person. You'll spend all your time learning Power BI, Tableau, everything. But when you build the dashboards, people are maybe not able to understand what you do. I'm just making it as an example, not that we cannot get better at any tool. But that is what I would advise anybody. Like, try consulting kind of a job where you have the feeling of like before taking on a full-time role, you can kind of test it out, and then whatever you like or whatever you feel, everybody, and feedback also, right? It's not just what you think you're the best. If you think you're the best in something and pretty much everybody disagrees, something has to be out of sync, right? And this has happened to me. I have had people where they felt they are extremely good in presentation, but they were not. When they were presenting, nobody was able to understand what's going on. So so that is why, like, try and then get that feedback. In 1 or 2 years of consulting, you'll definitely figure out like, oh, this is not something I like doing at all. Then you specialize. It is really not a very good advice to say specialize day one. You will have to eventually specialize. That statement I agree, because nobody can say, oh, I'm a master of all these things, because the more and more you start doing something, that is your specialty. That's why I said, like, most of my career I worked in healthcare, but did I not work in supply chain? No, I did supply chain too. Can I take the knowledge of my healthcare and kind of navigate? Yes, I can. But still, I have done more of this. So that's kind of belongs in, if you look at my profile, that's my specialty, right? So do that, like do the generalization, then you specialize.
So that exact process that Sangeeta just described is exactly how I began in the analytics space. Well, actually, I started with John David's course, and then I went into consulting for John David, and now I'm getting a little bit more into the teaching side of things. And I have to say that there is no better way than throwing yourself into a consulting engagement to make yourself learn something. Because if you are sitting there in front of the client and you're telling them, oh yeah, I can do this, this, and this, if you don't deliver at the end of the month, oh, that's a problem, right? And that's not a problem that's just short term, like bad for the company. It's a problem for you because then you're starting to be branded as the person who is not meeting deadlines. But the opposite is also true. If you do those consulting engagements and you do them on time, you do them well, and you maintain great communication with whoever the client is, then that just goes so much better for your future to be able to market that. And then that person's, I've had people who I've consulted with who have reached out to me and said, hey, you can use me as a contact if you need to. That's something that sometimes I think data people discount, is the value of human relationships. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the writing code or DAX or whatever it is, and we lose sight of that. Also, to the specialization point versus the generalization point, it kind of also depends what field you want to go into. You know, if you do want to be take on more of that scientist role and go more into the coding side of things, then yeah, maybe you want to consider specializing in one or two, widely regarded coding software. But maybe if you're going more into the business analytics side of things, I haven't used very much code up until this point. And so it may be more worthwhile to invest your time elsewhere. It's just a matter of personal values. Anyway, sorry for the speech. Any other questions, Olivia, Kadisha?
I did have one more question. What has been like the most rewarding and the most challenging, like working in the analytics space?
Most rewarding is the look in the face of people who didn't know this was possible, right? That happens more often than you think, because they think, oh, this cannot be automated, this cannot change, this is how we have been doing it. And that's change management aspect of it is the most challenging as well, because people are happy. That's a happy path kind of a place where they're happy doing the way they are doing. And that change management, it has to be a cultural, the mindset part of it is the most challenging also. It's very tough to go in and say, oh, by the way, you've been doing it like this for the last 3 years, we're going to change it, this is going to be automated now, or whatever, this is going to improve. Instead of doing this, you will do that. That is the most challenging to convince. But once they are on board with doing that, that's the most rewarding, because they kind of realize and you get that buy-in, right? So that is the most rewarding, I would say.
Thank you.
You convince them through the work, right?
Yeah, that's the only way.
So with that being said, any closing remarks, Olivia, Kadisha, Sangeeta, anything to wrap it up?
My closing remark would be just like, don't pay so much attention to the title of the role you're hired in, because that happens a lot more with like newer people applying, because they're like, oh, somebody I knew got a data scientist position, I am not getting that kind of a thing. Because many times companies don't use title exactly how you think. That's one thing. And also sometimes a data analyst role may be more easier to break into, and you will learn a lot about the business. You'll become a lot more valuable in a short period of time, because data analyst does a lot of digging into the data and figuring out, right? So it's not a bad thing. And then move on to your dream role. So don't let the title kind of make you feel like, oh no, I'm just going to apply to these titles. So don't do search like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, hold on, guys. I'm having a brain fart moment right now. This is going to be cut out. But by the way, we just had this is a great episode, by the way, so far. It's phenomenal. I'm super excited. As I'm thinking about what you just said, talking about don't worry so much about the title. I think that maybe sometimes people don't apply to a specific job because they feel like they don't might quite fit those job requirements, or maybe they don't quite fit the idea of what that job title is saying. what do you say to those people who are they're just nervous to apply? Would you just say, "Hey, give it a shot. What's the worst that can happen?" Or would you say, maybe you know yourself best?
I would say no harm in trying and give it a shot. And also going back to the title, like a data engineer role, for example, right? In a very large organization, it may be very like specific, like they're just building data pipeline. That is because they have so much of incoming data and so much of data pipelines to build. But data engineer may be a title in a different smaller company where the expectations are much wider. They want you to do a lot of different things. So that's why the title by itself will kind of trick you that, oh, if I'm going to be this is all I'll be working on. It depends on a lot of factors, whether they have a dedicated big data team or they are in the initial stages of building a data team. Because if they're in the initial stages of building a data team, the expectations will be you'll be like doing everything, right? So that is what I would say. Give it a try based on the description, read it, like at least no harm in trying. And if you go to the interview and you feel, oh, this is definitely not for me, that's totally a different story, but no harm in trying.
Have you ever had that happen to you where you showed up to a job interview and you were just like, "Oh, no way, I totally had the wrong expectation of this"?
Not any time recently. Maybe I feel like you slightly get better at it.
Olivia,
Understanding
Kadisha, that
the
ever happened to you
more.
guys?
But in the past, I've had it. So it's not like that doesn't happen, but not anything recently.
Well, okay, so Sangeeta, Olivia, and Kadisha, for anyone wanting to reach out to all three of you guys, is the best place to reach you on LinkedIn, or is there somewhere else? And also, Sangeeta, one more time, the name of the book. Don't forget.
Yeah, the name of my book is Thriving in the Data World. And to reach me, LinkedIn is the best way to reach me, I would say. I check it quite often, and so that's the best way.
Same goes for you, Olivia, Kadisha?
Yes.
Alrighty. Well, you heard it here first, folks. We've had a great episode today. Sangeeta, Olivia, Kadisha, thank you so much for taking some time out of your evening to meet with me. We made it. And for everyone listening, thank you so much. And we'll see you in the next one. Take care.